Welcome back and welcome to sewing one of the start blocks. I'm going to show some things that I think about as I sit down to sew the corner connectors with the start blocks. First of all, I like to sew, and I have my machine set on less than a 2.0 for my stitch length. I like to sew with a small stitch, and I do this on pretty much everything I sew anymore, especially when I'm sewing these smaller blocks. I just find that the larger stitch, it wants to pull away on the corners, and we're going to be, pressing this and pulling it fairly taut down there in that corner as we press, and I don't want any of my stitches popping when I am doing that pressing. Yes, if we do need to rip out, it is a little tougher with those tight little stitches to do that ripping. And so I always do tell people, and I'm always amazed when I'm helping somebody locally here with doing some unsewing, that their seam rippers are so dull. If your seam ripper is pretty old, if it's elderly, it might be time to invest in a new seam ripper, because they should be a pretty sharp point on those that will allow you to get underneath the stitches and break the stitches. So, you know, seam rippers aren't that expensive compared to all the fabrics that we use. So, invest in a nice seam ripper, one that's comfortable for your hand, and allow yourself to maybe do an updated seam ripper. Anyway, as I pick up, remember I have these all laid out here, and I have my design board next to me so that you can see what I'm sewing here. And I have my 4 blocks that I'm going to be attaching my first small square to the larger square to make those start points. And we're going to be sewing a diagonal seam. Notice I have no lines marked on mine. I like to use the diagonal seam tape by Cluck Cluck Sew. That's the name of the company, and they have a really excellent tutorial on their website on how to apply their tape so that you get it lined up with your needle, which is very important for accurate sewing. And I think they do an excellent job of showing how to apply the seam tape. I do, and I know my video only comes out so far, my filming, but I have my seam tapes extending clear to the edge of my table that my machine sits in. This allows me to use that seam tape even when I'm doing larger blocks. I only need a little bit here when I'm doing these small blocks, but I just leave it on all the time, and I just find it so useful. I find that I am more accurate with the Cluck Cluck Sew tape. I'm going to be following this red center line, which is in line with my needle. I think that when I would use my pencil to mark my lines, I think that sometimes I just didn't get my, ruler lined up real good. And if my pencil line was off, then certainly my sewing was going to be off as well. So again, I'm sewing this diagonal because this is going to fold over as my left corner, left lower corner. And so it's going to fold this way. And so I'm right-handed, so I'm going to turn this so that I'm going to be putting it under my machine. And I just make sure that this is lined up really nicely as I put it under my machine. I like to start with my needle in the down position, and I have a knee lift, so you'll see me not reaching back to my presser foot lift. I can do it with my knee lift. And I start out right smack in the corner, and I'm going to be sewing right smack to this corner. And notice how this corner is right smack lined up with the red line. And I make sure that these are staying nice and even, my raw edges on the 90-degree angle there. And as I sew, I'm just watching so that my needle, when I can't see my red line anymore, my needle is heading right to the point. So right in that 90-degree mark, I want my first stitch to be. I get myself lined up here, get my angle. And I like to hold down here to make sure that I'm holding that so it doesn't go askew as I sew. I'm not sewing very fast, at least I don't think I sew fast. Some may accuse me of sewing fast, But when I sew things like this, I want it to be accurate because I know that when I press it, it's just going to cause me heartache if it's not. When I first started sewing these, a lot of people, that was back when I was marking my lines, and a lot of people would say, sew a little bit to the side of the line, so that when you turn this, it takes up the stitch, and all that bulk takes up a little bit room, so it comes a little bit shy of your corner. I find that I do a lot better if I go right on where I'm supposed to be sewing and not try to make any adjustments. I want the stitching to be right smack in those areas, because I think that when this folds over, when I iron that, it makes the best straight line edge there for me when I go to seam my pieces together. When I do press, one thing I'll talk about now is when I do press, I press next. After I get these sewed, I will go, before I trim anything away, I go to the iron and I will press these, because I like to have that corner, my original square corner, intact as I press. And I know that directions are not written that way just because directions typically aren't written that way, but I think many of us have learned to do that so that we keep that line. Because if I have already cut this away, when I press this, it'd be easy to get it askewed and not lined up and not nice and square as I originally had it cut. So that just gives me a nice foundation for pressing. After I get it pressed with my iron, then I will come back and cut, and I just cut with my scissors a 1/4 inch away. I just eyeball it and cut using my snips, using my scissors. So again, to finish up my last one, and ever how you turn it, I'm right-handed, so I kind of give it a little turn that's easiest for me. If you're left-handed, you probably may go from the opposite corner to corner, because it seems like lefties do things opposite of us right-handers. So, whichever. The other thing I like to use when I'm doing, because these will be, even though I'm just doing 4 this time, these will be chain pieced together. I like to have one of these little cutters. It's like a little razor inside, and it certainly is handy when you're doing a lot of chain piecing. So again, this is just going to fold back here, or outside, fold out actually, and then I will be going to the iron to press.